Today we're going back to the 1960s to look at my first transistor radio. We've looked at a lot of collectibles on this channel and a lot of radios. But today we're going to look at the radio I got as a kid, my own first transistor radio. The way I got it, well, we'll get to that. What we're looking at right now is Christmas 1961, when my older brother got his first transistor radio. It's right there, wrapped up in one of those boxes under the tree. What he got was this radio, an American-made Motorola X23. My father bought it at the local TV and radio shop near our house, a place that isn't there anymore but looked a lot like this. You didn't get radios in a dime store or a drugstore in those days. No, those stores would be filled with transistor radios in just a few years, in the mid-60s, but in 1961 the radios were still fairly expensive, and there were not many places to buy them. If you're interested in this history, this book gives a good overview. I'm always delighted to find an old transistor radio in its original box, and this would have been just exactly what my brother unwrapped on that Christmas morning in 1961, while I was trying to figure out what to do with my lump of coal. But of course, this boxed Motorola is something I found later and is not his original radio. This is my brother's actual original radio. But when did I get my first transistor radio? Well, I wasn't going to get a transistor radio, not from my parents. As the middle child, I was expected to just wait until my brother tired of his, and then graciously accept the hand-me-down, like with all those sweaters. Except he wasn't about to hand me down his radio. He never used it, but he could see how much I wanted it, and it was his. Wasn't it bad enough that I had come along in the first place and ruined his status as the only child? Wasn't that bad enough? Or did he have to give up his radio, too? Well, he finally did give me his radio, this one, when I had been collecting radios for a while. In fact, I was 40 years old when I got this hand-me-down. And from the looks of it, with the rust on the dial and the missing nameplate, the radio might have been better off all along with me. As a kid, and this is me, by the way, on my 7th birthday, as a kid I had a keen interest in how things worked, and in inventors. Now, where I lived in the American heartland, that did not mean Da Vinci, Pasteur, or Marconi. No. Inventor meant Thomas Edison or Henry Ford. In 1962, when I was in the 4th grade, I read a biography of Henry Ford. That biography related the story that when Ford was a boy, he fixed a pocket watch for someone. He took the non-working watch, opened it up, and, looking closely, noticed a bit of dust inside of it. He simply blew the dust out, and the watch came back to life. And that, the story went, was how Henry Ford got his start. Well, I wanted to do that. I asked my grandfather if he had any old watches that didn't work. He thought a while, then went off somewhere and came back with this. Wow, I thought. He said, "You can have this one. I used to wear this on a chain, but it stopped working a long time ago, and I got this wristwatch." He started to show me his wristwatch, but of course I was completely enthralled with this Elgin pocket watch he had handed me. I turned it over and tried to turn the back to open it, and sure enough, the back unscrewed, and soon I was inside the watch. It was fantastic to me. I'd never seen anything like it. Though I could see no dust, I blew into the back of it anyway. The hairspring started to move the balance wheel back and forth, but of course I didn't know the names for these things back then. All I knew was that things had started to move inside the watch, and they kept moving. I tried to wind the watch, but the stem wouldn't let me. Apparently it was fully wound. Maybe, I thought, it was just overwound and stuck. Maybe it just needed me to get things going. I put the back on, and the watch ran all day, and most of the next, until it wound down and stopped. I wound it carefully and not too tight, and it started right back up again. However little effort I had expended, however primitive were my methods, it could not be denied that I had fixed the watch. So I put the word out to my fourth-grade class at school that I could fix watches and, for good measure, radios. My teacher had faith in me, or was just messing with the precocious little person that I was, when she brought me 3 old table radios to fix. Radios that would have looked like these. I took them home, got the tubes out, and tested them on that big tube tester down at the drugstore. Sure enough, 2 of the radios had bad tubes in them, and were cured by the replacement of those tubes. The third was, well, beyond me. But hey, 2 out of 3 is not bad. Al Kaline, my baseball hero, was the best hitter the Tigers had, and he only hit in 1 out of 3 at-bats. Now, many of my viewers here are quite knowledgeable about electronics. In spite of my auspicious 4th-grade beginning, my knowledge of electronics remains to this day quite shallow. Oh, I wanted to know more. As a kid, I wanted to know everything. I took my toys apart, and motors, and hearing aids, and anything else I could get my hands on. I saved my allowance to buy hobby kits and any parts necessary to build those experiments I read about in books. One of my prized possessions was this Heathkit electronic workshop. But my interest in electronics was not shared by anyone I knew. Do you know how hard it is to learn this sort of thing by yourself? Well, maybe you do. Or to learn such a thing as Morse code, which I needed to know in order to get a ham radio license. As you can probably imagine, it's much easier to learn Morse code if you are lucky enough to have a partner with whom you could exchange messages. Anyway, I knew no kids and no adults who knew anything or cared to know anything about electronics. Well, there was this one old guy my family knew who was an amateur radio enthusiast and a retired phone company engineer. Within a few months of the start of my electronics tinkering, I was brazenly designing circuits. And I showed this old guy one of them once. It was, or attempted to be, an amplifier for a crystal set radio. He stood there and looked at the diagram a while, then looked down at me, then looked at it a while longer, and started slowly shaking his head. When he finally spoke, he said, "Volume controls aren't for turning things up. therefore turning things down, which I did not understand at all. All I could think was, he sounded like my mother, always telling me to turn that thing down. After that, I'm quite sure he avoided me, and I don't remember ever talking to him again. So that's how it went for me. Even the hint of help from a knowledgeable adult was fleeting. I came to understand later that my amplifier plan was just, well, idiotic. But this experience was a life-changing moment for me. I couldn't understand the electronics theory, but I did begin to understand something about the culture in which I was being raised. I wasn't supposed to design a circuit. I was supposed to do my homework and play sports and sit quietly in church and not make a fuss and stop asking so damned many questions. I wasn't supposed to be an inventor or think critically or question authority. I was supposed to, above all else, know my place. In this culture, grown-ups are very nice, and these good people, out of the kindness of their hearts, will go out of their way to inform the young that other people far away from us, are our betters. And that is just the natural order of things. Ambition was all right, just as long as you knew your place. And these good people would also offer the caution that if you even try to excel at anything, or aspire to anything, or attempt to match your betters, you are committing that greatest of sins, the sin of being too big for your britches. Soon after my success with 2 out of the 3 table radios, a girl in my class entrusted to me this Invicta transistor radio for repair. It plays and then it stops, she told me. If I shake it, it sometimes comes back on. I, of course, bragged that I certainly could fix it without question, and that it would cost her 50 cents for the repair. She agreed, and I took it home to work on over the weekend. After removing the screws and taking the chassis out of the cabinet, I discovered that one of the wires from the battery clip was frayed and making poor contact with the board. I got out the big Weller soldering gun my father had bought to fix my cornet, and I soldered that wire back onto the board. Still no sound, though. I idly poked around on the circuit board with a small screwdriver. Nothing. But when I poked on the earphone jack, the radio suddenly sprang to life. That little contact that makes the speaker cut out when using the earphone was dirty, apparently, and a careful cleaning restored the radio to prime playing condition. Fixed! That next Monday morning, I presented the repaired radio to my client, with some pride, I might add. She looked at the radio as if it was something the dog left on the rug, and said to me, "Oh, that's nice, but my daddy got me a brand new radio, so you can keep that one." My first thought was, where's my 50 cents? But I quickly realized that this was better than 50 cents. This was my own radio. And here's me, around that time, in the fall of '63, with my glasses. Oh, you knew there was going to be glasses, didn't you? You can see on the circuit board my ongoing and relentless work forever improving my Invicta radio with the soldering gun, always in the belief that any problem was a bad connection. And those adjustment screws, those things I was pretty sure I shouldn't be messing with, I couldn't resist attempting the improved reception that was surely just a few more tweaks away. One of the things I was always trying to improve was the battery life. This radio really went through batteries quickly. So I'd reheat all those circuit board connections just to see if it would help, and it never did. I eventually resigned myself to the thought that the short battery life was just the result of the way the radio was designed by my betters. I never realized that the problem could be some faulty part that I didn't understand. Well, isn't that a bombshell of wisdom? We don't realize what we don't understand. Anyway, I still don't really understand it, but I'll bet many of my viewers here do, and know exactly what part or parts to suspect. Years later, when I had become a collector of these things, I came across this example of my first radio in the box. As you can see, the radio was supplied from the factory already in its case. And what's that wrapped up alongside it? A cleaning cloth imprinted with the Invicta name. Deluxe. Let's get this out of the case and look it over a minute and see how this radio looks before any 9-year-olds get a hold of it. Now, what was that idiotic circuit design I had concocted when I was 9 years old? Well, it's embarrassing to say, but pretty funny at my expense, so here goes. Crystal radios don't put out enough volume to power a speaker, and so must be heard on an earphone. A crystal radio derives all its power from the broadcasting station itself. How could I make my crystal radio louder? I pondered, and it came to me. I could make it louder with a volume control. Of course. That's how you make any radio louder. And so I drew up a crystal radio circuit with a potentiometer, a volume control, in what I thought would be the appropriate place in the circuit. I figured all I would then need to do was turn it up. And that's the circuit I showed the engineer I mentioned earlier. I wanted to confirm with him that I had the volume control in the right place in the circuit. And he addressed my brazen ignorance with the statement, "Volume controls aren't for turning things up. They're for turning things down." He was right, of course, and while he might have helped me understand, he did not. I wanted to understand, but that didn't seem to matter. It's easy to see why no one thought I was going to grow up to be alkaline. But what made them so damned sure I wasn't going to grow up to be an Edison? I sometimes wonder what happens to today's little Edisons and Fords as they pass through the 4th grade. And then I think, nah, there aren't any kids like that today. And that's when I stop and realize, to my chagrin, that the culture in which I was raised, that I have fought since I was 9, is with me still.